Apparently, talking to plants can help you get together with the love of your life. This story revolves around Eusebia, a girl who was forced into a marriage to save her kingdom because her magical talents were far from useful. Sadly, her marriage did nothing to save the kingdom from its doom. You're probably wondering how things got so bad for her. It all started in the kingdom of Archaea, home to the arcane arts. It was once a mighty nation where its people lived and breathed magic. But when humanity was stripped of this blessing, the country plunged into despair. When other powers started to grow and oppress the poor nation, the only hope they had was a marriage alliance. In the Cateral home, Xander bursts into his sister's room, hoping that the news he heard was a lie. He tells his sister to reconsider, but the older brother, Dietrich, tells the little miscreant to pipe down and stop being a nuisance. Xander believed his brother was insane for pressuring their sister into a marriage with Kanek Riadon. It was already bad enough that people laughed at their kingdom for letting their princess become a plaything for a bloodthirsty tyrant. Eusebia calmed Xander down and told him that it was her who requested the marriage and that she would be fine. Sorrow and tears filled up Xander's eyes as he kneeled beside his sister. He didn't understand why she had to get clapped by a madman. Dietrich then thanked her for sacrificing herself to save their kingdom. Eusebia knew that marrying for love was out of reach for someone who was royalty. She accepted her fate and proceeded to the altar, where she and Kanak were pronounced man and wife. The marriage was then sealed with a kiss. After that, the couple prepared to depart for Kanak's kingdom. Eusebia felt she was being snatched away because of how rushed the wedding feast was. Despite the awful rumors that had spread about Kanak, Eusebia saw something godlike about him. The way he inspired respect around him was deeply admired. Compared to him, she was just a useless piece of garbage. As the ruling house of Archaea, the Cateral bloodline had received the blessing of Argynwood. Every generation, a Cateral would awaken with primordial powers that flowed within the earth to protect the realm as her guardian. The role of the current generation was to be filled by Eusebia, but her powers were more than disappointing. As she pondered about her pathetic life, someone from the woods shot an arrow into her carriage. Eusebia was struck with fear as she saw that the arrow had pierced her heart. Her life flashed before her eyes, and she thought of the moment when Dietrich told her that it would have been better if they had a useful guardian to protect their kingdom. Sadly, her incompetence knew no bounds, as she was still killed, despite the marriage. When her eyes opened again, she was just a spirit, and she saw Kanak holding her lifeless body. Kanak blamed himself for trusting the Northerners. He decided to return to his kingdom and prepare for war against Archaea. Eusebia tried to stop him, but it was useless. Her spiritual body was struck with pain, and she couldn't move her legs. As she lay on the floor, she saw Dietrich, who had come to pay his respects to his dead sister. It was expected of a dear brother, or so you thought. Plot twist. Dietrich revealed that he was glad to be rid of the nuisance he called a sister. The assassin showed up and assured him that Eusebia was truly dead, just as they had planned. If Eusebia had working organs, she would have probably pissed on herself at that moment. She couldn't believe that her beloved brother planned her death. Dietrich's evil plot was only to make him king of Archaea, and bring Riadon to ruin under his rule. The classic dream of any royal fool. Just as they had planned, the war between Archaea and Riadon began. The chaos and misery that befell Eusebia's eyes left her in disbelief. Unable to help her people, she could only watch as they suffered. Dietrich accused Riadon of the assassination and tried to win the war by garnering the favor of other northern kingdoms. Nevertheless, his efforts were futile. Kanak crushed them like pesky insects, and everything was lost. Xander, her most loved brother, was sent to his maker amidst the chaos. After 3 years of the war, Dietrich was finally taken hostage and died at the hands of Kanak. The Emperor of Riadon was ruthless in his conquest and showed no mercy to his foes. Eusebia kneeled in the dead woods and wondered if this was what her brother wanted all along. She cried out to the spirit of Argynwood and asked it to take her soul and give the kingdom of Archaea another chance. A bright light then flashed before her, and the spirit answered her prayers. When she opened her eyes again, she saw her father and Xander. Her nightmare had come to an end, and she was back with her family once again. Eusebia was sent back to when she was 10 years old, and her guardian powers had just awakened. Still, she assumed that she was deranged and it wasn't possible that she had been sent back in time. Tears of joy ran down her face when she touched Xander and realized that her prayers had been truly answered. Eusebia was determined not to waste her second chance at saving her kingdom and family. The greatest power in the history of guardians was needed for her to achieve her goal. The Argynwood was once a human sister to the goddess Fihar. After her death, she was reborn as a great silver tree at the edge of the world. The people of Archaea came to worship and revere the Argynwood, and the forest bestowed them with grace in return. Those blessed with the powers became heroes who protected the kingdom against disasters and enemies. Eusebia's awakening was a symbol of hope for her people, but when they found out how pathetic her powers were, they hated her. All she could do then was talk to trees and flowers, and those were her only friends. Now that she had a second chance at life, she tested out her powers, hoping that the Arjunwood wouldn't have answered her prayers without giving her the powers she needed. As you would expect, her powers were still very much as useless as her. She could only grow a small shrub at the time. Eusebia wondered why she was brought back if the Arjunwood didn't give her the powers she needed. Moments later, Dietrich walked into the room and said that he heard about her awakening. He tried to touch her, but she slapped his repulsive hands away. He was confused, but all Eusebia saw was the maniac who killed her in her past life. She blamed it on her sickness and apologized to him. He then told her that he had bad news. He said that instead of the people celebrating their newfound guardian, they questioned if the Arjunwood was wise enough to choose such a useless girl. He told her that he didn't care about them and made it look like she was just a helpless little girl who people expected so much from. Seeing Dietrich's mannerisms and tone, she recalled her past life when the same awakening happened. Dietrich made it look like it was the people who didn't believe in her, and told her not to let them find out about her powers. In the end, she got pierced through like a rotisserie. Eusebia fought the doubt and hallucinations in her mind. Dietrich thought that his sister had completely lost it, but she said that she needed to go see the Arjunwood and find out what exactly she wanted from her. Eusebia told her father that she was going to see the Arjunwood, and he told her that only the monarch of Archaea was allowed to be in the divine being's presence. Being a stubborn blockhead, Eusebia insisted on going, saying that the goddess would not turn her away. Her father then gave her a heat-preserving pendant to protect her from the blizzard. In the northern wildwoods, Eusebia used her powers to communicate with the trees and tell them that she wanted an audience with the Arjunwood. The blizzard suddenly stopped, and she went ahead while her two guards stayed behind. You'd think two adults wouldn't be stupid enough to let a little child wander in the woods by herself. Anyway, as Eusebia proceeded, the Arjunwood called out to her, and she came face to face with the great tree. She was devastated to find out that it was not the Arjunwood who brought her back to life. The divine being said that Eusebia had misled her life, and she had never answered the little brat's prayers before. Eusebia was told to return to her father before the chilling cold would turn her into a popsicle. She still insisted, so the Arjunwood took pity on her and decided to share what was left of her life force with Eusebia. With her new strong powers, Eusebia was still a useless gardener, but could grow bigger weeds now. Years later, Eusebia, now 20 years old, approached some guards who were on duty. The captain of the guards said that they'd been able to boost their defenses thanks to her powers and craftsmanship. He tried to use his Riz skills on her, saying it felt like they had been through a war together. Eusebia spent the past 10 years of her new life studying and boosting the strength of her powers. Archaea's army had improved under her lead, but they were still far too weak to take on Kanak and his ever-growing empire. Eusebia was determined to save her kingdom, even if it meant that she'd be clapped by Kanak for the rest of her life. A letter soon came from Kanak, requesting for her hand in marriage. Dietrich pretended to be a caring brother, but she already knew that he was a spineless coward. A week later, he gave her a necklace that could be used for long-range communications. Eusebia was going to Riadon soon, and he wanted her to spy on Kanak and inform him of anything she found out. She tried to tell her foolish brother that his plans could cause a war, but Dietrich informed her that he was already preparing for that. Distress and misery set in as she heard his words. She tried thinking of a way to prevent the past from repeating itself. Dietrich saw his sister as a naive, blind fool who thought that their problems would be solved by a simple marriage. From the secret documents he gave her, it was said that the guardians of Archaea couldn't bear children and used their powers outside of their kingdom. It really must be tough being this useless and helpless. Regardless, Eusebia refused to believe Dietrich's words. She couldn't fathom the thought of not being able to have children. But then again, she wondered if it was true. Meanwhile, Kanak was showing off his pecs and muscles while having a bath in preparation to receive Eusebia. When the wedding day came, Eusebia thought about how she searched through the records of Eusebia, and none of them spoke about the descendants of the Guardians. She realized the truth and was scared of what Kanak would do if he found out that she couldn't produce an heir. She nervously bit her nails, thinking of how to be useful to the Emperor of Riadon. Then, Kanak walked into the room and noticed that she was upset about the marriage arrangement. She tried to tell him that it would be an honor for her, but he could see through her filthy lies. Kanak asked her to stop with the formalities and just call him by his name. His Riz skills were working like a charm, and she wondered why he was acting so nice since it never happened in her previous life. After that, Eusebia got dressed, and her maid, Cecil, wailed like a wimp and begged her not to leave them. She then left to the altar, and once again, she and Kanak were pronounced husband and wife. She tried to remain stone cold, but she couldn't resist a Giga Chad like Kanak and his kissing skills. There was no wedding feast this time. Instead, they hastily prepared to return to Riadon. Eusebia was lost in thought, thinking that if Kanak found out that she had no use as a baby factory, her plans to foil Dietrich's schemes would fail. Kanak's strange kindness and gestures made her worried, and she wondered if it would either bring a brighter future or if it was a sign of an omen. While they rode in the carriage, Kanak said that she still looked upset and asked if she planned to escape from the marriage. Eusebia snapped back at his accusations and said it was her duty to fulfill her role as his wife, but he scoffed at her words. Kanak then asked her how she saw him in her eyes. Eusebia was short of words, and he knew that she didn't trust him and saw him as a monster. She tried to defend herself, but the carriage suddenly stopped, and she fell into his arms. It's almost like his special power is to make women speechless and stare into his eyes. He tried to see if she was alright when one of the guards came and told them that the carriage stopped because a tree was blocking the way. When Kanak looked back at his beloved wife, he saw the cold sweat running down her face and how scared she looked. Eusebia could feel her powers leaving her as they left Archaea, and she was scared for her life. Her mind kept feeding her thoughts of how it was all part of Dietrich's plan to have her killed. Luckily, Kanak called her back to her senses, and all she could do was cry in his arms. Later at night, he apologized for being a nuisance to her and promised not to annul their marriage. In return, he asked her not to look at him with so much fear in her eyes. Eusebia then realized that there was more to this hot guy than she gave him credit for. She had studied a bit about him and found out that he was a slave who fought to free his people and his nation. The more she found out, the more she realized that he wasn't the boogeyman people painted him to be. As they were flirting with each other, a guard informed them they had gotten close to the harbor. Somewhere else, a green-haired man thought Kanak was insane to rush out after his marriage. Then word came that the emperor would soon return, and he prepared to see the kind of woman their new empress was. When Kanak's carriage got to the harbor, he helped Eusebia to come down. She missed her footing and nearly fell, but Kanak caught her in time. While things were about to get quite steamy, the green-haired, whom Kanak referred to as Oslin, showed up. Oslin was famously known as the Riadon Empire's first secretary. He was a man of humble origin, born to a baron. He used his uncanny business skills to lift his house from dire straits and became Kanak's strategist. Eusebia introduced herself to him, and they proceeded to the ship. While the other unfortunate single men stood there, she and Kanak continued flirting in their faces. Oslin told Kanak that it wasn't right for Eusebia to call him by his name in public, but the emperor didn't care about the formalities. They got into an argument, and Eusebia used her skills to get Kanak to sweep her off her feet. After carrying back to her room, Kanak said he would return to clap her after attending to some important matters. Frustration set in as Eusebia thought about how she would share a bed with him. Kanak comforted her and told her they would not consummate the marriage that night, but it would be weird if they slept in separate rooms. He wasn't in a hurry to get down and dirty because he wanted Eusebia to love him first. In his office, thoughts of how difficult the marriage was ran through Kanak, and he said it was better if Eusebia didn't remember the past. Then suddenly, Oslin burst into the office and questioned him about why their forces were sent to protect Archaean borders. He didn't comprehend why their soldiers had to risk their lives for a pesky kingdom and a spoiled princess. Kanak warned him to watch his words and get out of the office. Meanwhile, Eusebia felt unwell and tried to go get medicine, but bumped into Kanak. She attempted to play off her illness, but she stumbled and vomited on his clothes. She was frightened by how she had defiled the emperor's clothes and feared for her miserable life. Evil thoughts crept into her mind and reminded her of how useless and incompetent she was. Kanak urged her not to worry and just took off his shirt in front of her. He really doesn't hesitate to strut his stuff. He simply put on another shirt and told her that she had not displeased him. It was a simple seasickness that affected her, and he apologized for not making better arrangements. Kanak then told her about his time on the battlefield. He once met a desperate young man back then who kept nagging about joining the revolution. When they came across a decapitated corpse, the foolish brat soiled his clothes, and it was none other than the stupid Oslin. After telling her this story, Eusebia was able to cheer up and believe that he was quite the soft man. Later on, a frail, timid boy known as Simon, who was Riadon's court physician, came to check on Eusebia. After she introduced herself, Kanak was ready to snap the boy like a twig for wasting so much time before coming to attend to his wife. Simon was trembling greatly, but Eusebia managed to calm him down and welcome him warmly. After he left, Kanak revealed he was jealous of the way Eusebia held Simon's hands. She apologized and promised to be more mindful of how she approached other men. After that, Kanak gave her some raspberries before she went to sleep. He remained in the room to do some work while he watched over her. Eusebia thought of how Kanak cared deeply for her and hoped it would bring peace between their two nations. But thoughts of Dietrich plagued her mind, and she was once again reminded of how hopeless she was as an empress. She just needed to focus on stopping Kanak from destroying Archaea. The next day, she stepped out to see what traveling on a ship looked like. She was met with a beautiful view of the sea and marveled at how radiant it looked. The guards greeted her, and she saw how wary they were of her. She wasn't from their kingdom, and they saw her as a low-life creature who was not worthy of their emperor. Suddenly, Simon rushed out to the deck and told her that it wasn't good for her to be out since the weather was so chilly. Unfortunately for him, Kanak showed up and was ready to send him to an early grave. Kanak carried Eusebia back to her room, but she was flustered by how he made her look like a helpless baby. He didn't care about what the others had to say, as long as she was all right. Back in their room, he brought some books for her to read, and they spent some time reading together. Eusebia was happy to have someone who was a bookworm like her. In her past life, she spent her lonely days reading books to peek into the lives and thoughts of writers she had never met. She eventually dozed and was woken up later by Kanak. Their ship had arrived at the port, and they were about to enter the imperial palace. As they rode in the carriage, Kanak told her that he wanted to introduce her to his people by a more fitting marriage ceremony. He saw the one they had in Archaea as merely child's play. So much for respecting your wife's origins. When they got to the palace, the head of the maids, Marion, gave Eusebia a tour of the palace. In her bed chambers, Eusebia got nervous when Marion told her that preparations would be made for her first night. I guess it was finally time for the consummation. When Kanak came in, he noticed how different the place looked and how beautiful Eusebia looked in her gown. He tried his best to hold back his urges when he looked at her. Then they both confessed that they were both amateurs when it came to the matters of the bedroom. Kanak suggested that they take things slowly by lying down next to each other first. Eusebia decided to change her gown, and he offered to help by undoing the buttons of the dress. He really wanted those cakes by any means necessary. After helping her undress, they got into bed together and held hands. Kanak told her that on the ship, he would sleep on the sofa and watch over her because she always had nightmares. Eusebia confessed that he was nothing like the insane, bloodthirsty tyrant that people had painted him out to be. She felt she was unworthy of him, but Kanak told her that he didn't regret sealing their union before the marriage altar. He also told her that she would always be needed by him. Eusebia thought about those nice words but reminded herself that all Kanak wanted was a woman to give him a child capable of wielding magic. The next morning, she headed to the library and asked the librarian if there was a section dedicated to magic. She went to the secret archives, and a particular book with a green hardcover caught her attention. The book was about the rise of magic in the far north and the history of non-human races. 300 years ago, vile abominations infested the realm of men and threatened the sylvan body of the Argynwood. A warrior of Catarrhal blood emerged and defeated the vile creatures, vowing to forever stand as the guardian of the Argynwood's hallowed forests. This pleased the goddess Fihar, and the Catarrhal bloodline was blessed. Due to how strong the divine power was, the Catarrhals were forced to bind their souls to the Argynwood, never to know the joy of ordinary existence again. The one exception was a lady known as Genessa Catarrhal. She surpassed the limitations of her body and bore a child who received the favor of the Sylvan Elves. She was also an eternal friend of the Sylvan Elves. After reading through, Eusebia thought about contacting the elves to find out more about Genessa. While she was lost in thought, Kanak came to get her. He reprimanded her for neglecting herself and skipping meals. Eusebia apologized with a puppy look on her face, making Kanak fall for her charm like a hopeless fool. He said he should have been more attentive to their needs, and as their lips drew closer, he quickly sidestepped and told her to follow. Kanak introduced her to a garden made just for her. His continuous kindness made it difficult for her to focus on her mission. You can't really blame a girl. The Archean-style manor was also made for her sake. Eusebia then noticed a special flower with a strong mana flow. She spoke to the flower, and it cried out, warning her to run or she would meet her untimely end. A week prior, a man and a woman had met inside the greenhouse, and the man was trying to get the woman to accept an offer. She was asked to inform him about how Eusebia spent her days in the mansion, and was then revealed to be Marion. She didn't have much of a choice because the life of her sister, Edie's, was on the line. Edie's was struck with a plague that could send her 6 feet under at any moment. The strange man offered Marion the riches she needed to acquire the medicine in return for updates about Eusebia. Marion was caught in a tough situation and wondered what she had to do. Back in the present, Oslin gave Kanak some forms about their tax revenues and reform plans. Kanak still had to deal with the nobles, who didn't like the fact that a disgusting slave was crowned as their emperor. Oslin warned him that they could decide to revolt against him, but Kanak was tired of spilling blood in the land. Meanwhile, in the gardens, Eusebia summoned Marion to ask her some questions. As they discussed, Marion spoke about her sister, who had the rigor disease. She told Eusebia that the afflicted weren't allowed to stay in the palace, and she had been searching for a cure. Unknown to Marion, Eusebia knew what was going on thanks to the magic flower she spoke to. Eusebia wanted to get closer to Marion and others around her, so she would not repeat her tragic past. She promised to help Marion find a cure for Edie's. After that, she went to see Kanak. Oslin tried to tell her that she was interrupting, but Kanak shut the fool up and told her that it was all right. With Kanak about to round up his work, she asked him to attend dinner with her. The table was filled with food, large enough to feed a community. I guess being a royal means wasting food for fun. Kanak realized that Eusebia wasn't eating well and insisted that they would always eat together from then on. After that little oppression to all you singles, she told him about the issue Marion was facing. Eusebia asked for his permission to allow Edie's to stay in the palace, and he agreed to put the girl in the palace hospital. He told her that she was the empress, so she was allowed to do anything in the nation. After that, Eusebia hurried to finish her meal and excuse herself. There was a crumb on her cheek, and Kanak stood to wipe it. In the process, they had another tense moment with their faces close to each other. Just when things were about to get spicy, Oslin had to burst in and ruin the moment. What an idiot. Later on, Eusebia informed Marion that her sister would be allowed to stay in the palace hospital. The maid felt she was a pathetic lowlife who was unworthy of such a privilege, but Eusebia told her that she had merited the reward for her work. Tears flowed down Marion's eyes because she felt bad that she was put against such a kind-hearted person. She confessed about the strange man who had told her to spy on the empress. He was known as Baron Edwin and was one of the nobles who supported Kanak. He was a cunning man and opportunist who spoke against the former emperor before the revolution. Oslin prevented the nobles from accepting titles, but they all got rewarded for their support. Edwin ended up squandering all his money and then had to work as an underpaid intern among the rank and file of the imperial bureaucracy. Eusebia found out that Edwin was rewarded with land that bordered the lands of the non-human races and Archaea. As she realized this, she thought that the other conspirator must have been none other than Dietrich. Marion then asked for permission to act as a double agent in order to find out who was giving orders to Edwin. Eusebia wasn't fond of the idea but granted Marion's request. That evening, she returned to the greenhouse to tend to the flowers. Deeply lost in her thoughts, she didn't notice Kanak until he called her name. She told him that she wasn't sure if she was worthy of Marion's trust, but with his hot riz skills, he told her that she was deserving of leading a nation and did a good job of noticing the hard work of the servants in the palace. Of course, Kanak's kindness always reminded her of how she's been lying to him about her fertility. After that, Eusebia went to her room and picked up the necklace to contact her useless brother, Dietrich. He revealed that it was he who sent someone to keep an eye on her but didn't disclose the identity of the person. Eusebia tried to find out who it was, but Dietrich said it wasn't something she should be concerned about. Instead, he asked her to look into Kanak's tax reform policies and find out why some aristocrats had sided with the emperor. Eusebia was worried about how this would affect the people of Archaea, but Dietrich told her to make use of her cakes and find out Kanak's weakness. After their talk, he was infuriated that his good-for-nothing sister would dare talk back to him, claiming that she had no idea what he had done to protect their kingdom. Dietrich was envious of his sister ever since her powers awakened and the royals considered crowning her as the ruler of Archaea. Due to that, he wanted to show them that Archaea needed to come out on top as the ruler of their continent. Back in Riadon, Eusebia wanted to know the members of the imperial diet so that she could find out who was feeding Dietrich with information. Marion suggested that she invite the wives of the members for a tea party to gather the intel she needed. The greenhouse was used as a venue for the tea party. There, Eusebia kept her eye on the lady known as Duchess Evelyn Hale, who commanded the most influence out of all the other women. House Hale was a royalist family that was also among the first of the old nobility to openly support Kanak's revolution. Eusebia noticed the presence of Oslin's little sister, Lindbera, who looked like a typical pushover and didn't want to mingle with the others. Lindbera fumbled her words when she tried to speak, and the other women made fun of her. Evelyn then asked Eusebia if her homeland was as wretched as Linbera's. After Eusebia made them look like fools with her reply, Evelyn asked her to clarify herself because her brain was too inept to understand. Eusebia explained how harsh the weather was in the north and hoped that the women were taking care of their subjects well. The women were too embarrassed to answer, except for Linbera, who showed how selfless she was in helping her people. Eusebia then threw the question back to Evelyn again, but the Duchess felt insulted and assumed she was being accused of treason. Lady Gauthier decided to be a foul snitch and spilled the beans. A mithril mine that previously belonged to the crown was scheduled for auction, so Gauthier and Evelyn wanted to acquire it themselves. Evelyn felt betrayed by the fool, but what did she expect from the woman in the face of the power of the crown? With no other choice, Evelyn decided to leave before any more of her secrets would be spilled. A week later, Eusebia was convinced that she had become an enemy of the ladies because she hadn't received a single letter from anyone. Then Oslin walked in and gave her a letter from his sister. The letter contained a gift of tea leaves, and Oslin thanked the Empress for standing up for his little sister. The next day, Eusebia and Kanak were having a meal when she told him that she was happy about getting closer to his inner circle. Kanak was already jealous and said she always brought out his petty side. But the foolish girl didn't know what he was talking about. You'd think she'd be smart enough by now to understand her husband. Anyway, later on, Edis was welcomed to the palace by Eusebia and Marion. Eusebia was hoping to become good friends with the little girl, but when they shook hands, she felt an ominous aura from Edis. Simon then showed up and took them to the palace hospital. There, he said that research on the rigor disease had hit a dead end because they weren't knowledgeable about magic. Eusebia offered to help and asked Kanak for permission, but he refused. He explained that he was concerned about the Giller trading guild that supplied most of the cure for the rigor. It wouldn't be wise of him to make enemies of those who influenced the flow of gold in the kingdom. Despite his explanations, Eusebia wasn't having it, and she started screaming like a deranged brat. She quickly calmed down and apologized for stepping out of bounds, but Kanak apologized, and she saw that he looked like a scared wimp. Tears and fear welled up in his eyes as he told Eusebia that he wanted to protect her because he was scared he would fail to protect the person he cared for. When Eusebia asked what he was talking about, he quickly got up and left the room. By the next morning, Kanak still hadn't returned to the room. Marion brought flowers for Eusebia and told her that they were always handpicked by Kanak. Upon hearing this, Eusebia cried and realized that he truly wasn't a bad person. She went to the garden that morning when she noticed a loud noise. While investigating, she saw a weird guy with an eye patch dozing off. As she attempted to call the guards, the guy got up and started yelling for help. It's like most of the guys in this place have something wrong with them. He then introduced himself as Jaxer, Kanak's close friend like Oslin, who was also a slave and the commander of the Imperial Army. He then told Eusebia that he wasn't with the Imperial Army anymore. He had resigned because he felt he was too pretty for the battlefield. I guess Narcissus has some competition now. Jaxer began to speak ill of Kanak, saying that the Emperor wasn't the likable person Eusebia believed him to be. She warned him not to overstep and not to stop his baseless accusations. She said he was the best husband she could have asked for. Surprisingly, Kanak was standing behind her and blushing like a little boy who just got a new toy. Having caused the trouble he wanted, Jaxer ran off like a Looney Tunes character. With Jaxer gone, the two lovebirds were able to make up, and Kanak apologized for their argument the previous night. Since Kanak was also a spoiled rich kid, he gave Eusebia a magical artifact as a gift. When she squeezed it in her hands, pretty magical lights emanated from it. After that, Kanak went in for a kiss finally, and it worked. Eusebia wasn't even able to catch her breath before the sly Casanova went in for another one, and the scene got really hot. Seeing how much the Giga Chad cared for her, Eusebia explained why they had to make a cure for the rigor disease. Left speechless by her charms, he allowed her on the condition that she wouldn't neglect her own safety. While he was about to go in for another kiss, Eusebia, being a silly girl, ruined it and suggested that they distribute their cure through a discreet channel. Kanak told her that he would figure out a way to protect her and her research, and then she asked him if he would be sleeping in their bed that night. After promising to always be with her, Kanak introduced her to an underground tunnel that served as an escape route during emergencies. When they got down there, he showed her a work table, which she could be using for her research. Oslin and Simon then walked in, to her great surprise. Oslin said he was tasked with constructing the tunnel, even though he didn't see the use of it. He had already put in effort to help out, and Eusebia thanked both him and Simon. After a week, their efforts yielded no result and were as useless as our protagonist. As they brainstormed, Eusebia mistakenly spilled ink all over her papers. Marion then told her to take a break because she had been working herself like a mule. It was already enough that she was putting in a lot of effort to cure the masses of the disease. After serving her tea, Marion apologized for not using the water of the Fihar. She then explained that she grew up in a little village beside the river before having to work to feed her family after the death of her parents. Despite living under the same roof, Marion never caught the rigor disease from Aedes, which led Eusebia to believe that it was the great water of the Fihar that had poisoned the people. Eusebia quickly informed Kanak, and they went to inspect the river. Luckily, their disguise worked, and no one was able to recognize who they were. They must have been really dumb to not see through a ridiculous disguise. The lovebirds were supposed to be on an important mission, but Kanak used the chance to flatter the love of his life and steal a kiss. He's always acting like a lost puppy around her. While he went to get a sample of the water, Eusebia did what she did best by talking to the flowers to find out what was going on. From the memories of the little shrubs, she saw a hooded man poisoning the water, and she felt the same ominous magic that killed her in her past life. As she racked her brain, Eusebia realized that the Gillier Trading Guild had been working for Dietrich, and he was trying to use the profits to shake the empire at its core. When Kanak returned, Eusebia didn't know how to inform him about what she had discovered. She felt that he would see her as a nuisance and wouldn't believe anything she said. But Kanak proved to be a desperate fool in love. After she explained her abilities and everything else, Kanak believed her and was glad that they were able to find the cause of the plague. In the research room, Simon showed her documents of the patients who had patches on their chests and bellies. Eusebia said that the cause might have been an elven herb that was known for causing discoloration, and it might be the clue they've been looking for. Meanwhile, Dietrich met with his accomplice, known as Raman. He reminded Dietrich to send his sister to the pearly gates if she ever became an obstacle. He also informed Dietrich that Eusebia and Kanak were seen close to the river under a disguise. Dietrich was worried that his sister had caught on to their plans, but Raman assured him that he was just a faceless shadow to her. Back in Riadon, Simon was thrilled that the Empress was way more competent than him. When Kanak came in, Eusebia told him about the elven herb, which was one of the components of the medicine. Thanks to the Emperor, he had been able to strike a deal with the dwarves who had a good relationship with the Dark Elves. For some reason, this is the only universe where dwarves and elves get along. Oslin then went to meet the guildmaster of the dwarves to arrange a meeting, but the Short King told him that the Dark Elves hated the humans. It didn't help that the elves had been suffering attacks recently, and most of the victims were those who stayed close to human territory. The dwarf dropped some elven seeds and wished Oslin good fortune in his endeavors before leaving. Oslin reported back to Kanak and Eusebia after his meeting. Kanak apologized to his wife for being a good-for-nothing husband and failing her when she needed him. Eusebia said it wasn't his fault, and she hadn't given up just yet. The next morning, Kanak met Eusebia, who was already working like a slave, trying to sprout the seeds with her little magic. He told her that everyone was worried about her and begged her to dump his lonely butt. Eusebia apologized and kissed him. From there, Kanak took the lead, while she made happy noises as they enjoyed each other. When they were done, she explained why she felt burdened as the guardian of Archaea due to her people's expectations. Suddenly, she noticed something poking her from Kanak's trousers. "Yeah, it's not what you're thinking." Kanak then brought out a bottle of water. He said it was a sample from the Great River and thought it would be useful for her research. He felt useless for not being able to provide more support, and wished he was a sorcerer instead. There was a time when he wished to acquire magic strong enough to bend the world to his will, but he said the reason he became Emperor of Riadon was solely because of Eusebia. She explained that he'd have to be born as a non-human to wield magic. At that moment, she recalled that she sensed a faint sign of magic the first time she met Aedes. She quickly got up and went back to the research room while collecting her thoughts. That's when she realized that the plague was targeted at humans who had an aptitude for magic. Meanwhile, the Gillier Guildmaster, Raman, was trying to send an invitation letter to the Imperial Palace. The letter was delivered to Marion by Edwin. The Baron told Marion to get Eusebia interested in the banquet by any means necessary. Later on, Eusebia informed Kanak and the others about how the rigor targeted people with magical abilities. She told them that it was a plot against their citizens, and Oslin asked if it was created artificially. With this information, they needed to work quickly before the Empire would be turned into a wretched graveyard. Eusebia told them that there had to be a connection between the Gillier Guild and the spellcaster who poisoned the river. She showed the letter of invitation by the Gillier Guildmaster. Although Oslin was against it, Kanak decided to attend the banquet with his wife because he couldn't say no to her. They might as well jump into the river since they're so stupid. The banquet venue was in a forest that the guild owned. So much for an elegant banquet. Kanak was still worried about his wife, but Eusebia recalled Marian's words, which reminded her about how much the emperor cared for her. She was called back to her senses by Kanak, who suggested that they could turn back if she wasn't comfortable. But with the hottest guy on the block there, she felt very safe with him. The trumpets were blown to welcome Raman, who introduced himself to his guests. While Kanak went ahead with the hunt deep in the woods, Eusebia stayed on the outskirts to look for clues. From the memories within the trees, she saw the sorcerer who posed to be Raman. He transformed his body and disposed of the bodies of his failed experiments in those woods. When she returned to give Kanak feedback, they were interrupted by Raman, and she couldn't stand the strong magic aura he exuded. Considering how powerful it was, she said there was little chance that he was the same sorcerer that Dietrich employed. Eusebia was able to calm herself from shaking like a chihuahua and decided to use the opportunity to gather more information. After much back and forth, Raman proved to be an enemy who was only after filling his pockets, and he wanted an imperial warrant for his guild. Eusebia was tired of dealing with complete idiots everywhere she went as well. Kanak backed her up and refused to give Raman the warrant because of how displeased she was with him. It's only right for a love-struck husband. Raman took his loss like a champ and told them to enjoy the rest of the banquet. They went outside to enjoy the fireworks, and Eusebia admired how Kanak always made her feel better whenever she was distressed. She promised to tell him all her secrets once the war was successfully prevented so that they could live happily ever after like a Disney couple. Soon after, Kanak tasted a glass of wine and said it was safe for her to drink. Suddenly, Eusebia coughed out blood after drinking some, and it seemed like all hope was lost. Kanak blamed himself and promised to slaughter all those who took his wife from him. Eusebia was trying her best to stop her consciousness from fading so that Kanak wouldn't become the bloodthirsty killer like last time. But there was no hope. Kanak held his dear wife and let out tears like a crybaby. Jasker then informed him that they had caught the assassin, and Kanak moved to kill the culprit immediately. He asked for the antidote first and wanted to know who the assassin took orders from. Meanwhile, Eusebia was trying to fight for her life using her magic. When they returned to the palace, Oslin tried to tell Kanak that he couldn't just detain members of the court without concrete proof, but the emperor was too far gone to be reasoned with. Jasker even tried to talk some sense into him, but Kanak swore to torture the nobles until they confessed who killed his wife. Jasker was frightened because he knew how much of a deranged maniac Kanak was, but Oslin was clueless. The skies cried out with a heavy storm, reminding Kanak of his younger days. Years ago, when he was 14 years old, he was locked up in the stables as a slave and was starved of food and water. There, he met a young Eusebia who wished to help the filthy boy. Days passed, and she kept bringing food and medicine for him. One day, he noticed an injury on her leg, and she explained that her brother lashed out at her when she met with Vanen, who was supposed to be her spouse. Kanak told her that Vanen was a good-for-nothing piece of trash, and she didn't need to bother herself with impressing him. Eusebia took his words in her heart and promised to take him to Archaea someday. As customary in their land, she gave him a handkerchief as her favored knight, and that was the moment Kanak threw away common sense to become a love-struck man. Since that day, Kanak fought to be reunited with the love of his life. In the last war that was fought between Riadon and Archaea, Kanak found out that the Argynwood could grant a wish to the monarch of the kingdom. His mindless thoughts led him to kill Dietrich and usurp the throne in order to bring back Eusebia. Jasker eventually died, and Oslin begged the emperor to think of his people and not build his empire on blood. When he finally met with the Argynwood, she refused to grant Kanak's wish. Argynwood explained that his wish was not something the gods could tamper with because Eusebia's death had already been recorded. Just when he was about to slice himself like minced meat, Fihar appeared before him. Fihar said she would use Kanak to test Eusebia's fate since her powers were too weak. Argynwood was against her sister's idea because she felt that Eusebia could still suffer the same fate again. Kanak promised to do everything to protect Eusebia if they granted his wish, and Argynwood asked him why he was willing to throw everything away for the girl. As Fihar transported him back in time, Kanak said that the only reason he had was because he was Eusebia's sworn knight. In the end, both of them were sent back, but it was Kanak's wish that was granted and not Eusebia's. Fast forward to the present, Eusebia finally opened her eyes and saw her crybaby husband holding her hands. Not a single trace of the poison could be detected in her body anymore. Simon and Marian were really glad to have her back, but Kanak was trying to be a hard guy. With what had happened to her, Eusebia was sure that Raman and the assassin from the previous timeline were the same person. She demanded to see Raman. But Kanak wasn't about to let the stupid girl jump into another suicide mission. Kanak revealed that Ramen had gone missing, and he blamed himself for all of it. He suspected some of the Fernans had survived the revolution, and they were the ones who attempted to take Eusebia's life. She wanted to reveal that Ramen was working for her brother and not the Fernans, but the thought of Kanak pushing away from her made her hesitate. Luckily, she finally grew a backbone and told him the truth. She also revealed her barren nature to him, but Kanak said that she was all he cared about. So far as he was able to clap her, he didn't care about an heir. In that heated moment, they went to their bed to relieve themselves. While making happy noises and enjoying themselves, Eusebia faintly felt like she had met him in the distant past. But Kanak's mind was hell-bent on satisfying his urges. Later on, he told her that they had actually met in the past, but she couldn't fully remember. The next day, Eusebia asked him to start explaining what had been happening and how Ramen escaped. Kanak didn't want to involve her in the matter, and he felt that she was tired from their exercise the previous night. He then told her that they hadn't found reasonable traces of Ramen. According to Eusebia, Ramen had enhanced his magical powers with the dead bodies of those who died from the rigor. Still, it didn't make sense that mere sorcerer and prince had so much influence, which was why Kanak believed the Fernans were still somehow involved. When Kanak mentioned that the Fernans had silver hair and purple eyes, Eusebia recalled how Ramen looked when he transformed his body. This meant that Ramen would be another cause of war to restore the Fernan rule to Riadon. Meanwhile, Duke Howard returned home to his wife Evelyn. He dismissed her because he felt she was nothing but incompetent. After that, Ramen approached him and asked why he was a traitor. Howard was scared to the bone and told Ramen that he wanted no part in his mad plans anymore. Ramen offered him a second chance, but Howard would have most likely preferred to be 6 feet in the grave than work for such a deranged person. He brainwashed Howard and turned the Duke into a mindless zombie. In Eusebia's bedroom, she was having a horrible dream where a child was about to be slaughtered. The Arjunwood spoke to her, telling her that she was useless and already dead, so there was nothing she could do. But Eusebia broke her chains and said she would try again and again no matter what it took. Seeing her resilience, the Arjunwood promised to reawaken Eusebia's powers so that she would protect the world and save the divines. The next morning, Eusebia woke up confused about the dream she had. She tried using her powers on a plant pot, but she eventually passed out from exhaustion. Kanak woke her up later, and they saw a small shrub had grown in one of the plant pots. When she went to investigate, it suddenly sprouted into a full tree. Later, she told Kanak of her dream, and she was delighted that the Arjunwood was with her. The powers got to her head, and she decided to become the next Avenger by taking Ramen head on. Kanak was happy for her but was too dumbfounded to tell his deranged wife anything. That night in their room, Kanak told Eusebia how he felt about not being able to relieve her burden and called himself a loser for it. Finally, she realized that he was the boy she met in the stable all those years ago. He went to war and devised all the plans just to meet her again. He was really setting the standards to a crazy level. Eusebia swore not to waste the life she had been given and cried tears of happiness as they shared the bed that night. After that, they went through the patrol logs, and she noticed something was amiss but couldn't pinpoint what exactly it was. Seconds later, she noticed that one of the soldiers had irregular shifts, but that same person was the one that Ramen transformed into and was left unconscious. Eusebia started to look at the big picture more to narrow down their list of suspects, but the two people in charge of changing guard duty shifts were Oslin and Jasker. Kanak felt like he should have investigated them first, but Eusebia reminded him not to betray his closest friends. She then continued with her investigations, thinking of a way to lure out Ramen. Eusebia used her magic to sprout the dark elven magic. While she was doing her incantations, Simon walked in and nearly had a heart attack. Luckily, it wasn't a blood ritual. She then told him that the flower was different from the specimen she expected, so she was going to pay a visit to the dwarf. They contacted the short stuff, and he apologized for giving them the wrong seed. He offered to meet up and bring the right one, provided that Eusebia came as well. Kanak picked a location that was near the Archean borders in order to test Oslin and Jasker. Meanwhile, Ramen was informed about the Empress's movements and spoke to a mysterious figure in a cloak who was yet to reveal himself. Duke Howard also informed him that an object of theirs had been moved to the Mithril mines. Unknown to Kanak's right-hand men, Simon disguised as Eusebia on the meeting day. The poor guy was put on a suicide mission without a choice. Meanwhile, Eusebia and Marion disguised themselves as porters and followed the carriage. Still, Kanak was worried that his wife's stupid plan could fail at any moment. He decided to cool off by sparring with Jasker and nearly took the guy's head off. Jasker and Oslin then started arguing like insufferable siblings, while Kanak was conflicted about which one of them was a traitor. Thanks to Yusibia acting as a filthy porter, she marveled at how life outside her spoiled princess treatment was. As Kanak poured out drinks later, he told Yusibia to be vigilant since they would soon arrive at their destination. When Kanak finally met with the dwarf, Yusibia spoke with the trees and asked them about Ramen. They told her that he had gone off to a crowded place to kill the Empress. In a tent, Simon, who had dressed up as the Empress, was about to become one with the earth. However, Marion snuck up on the assassin, and they found out that he wasn't the real Ramen. Yusibia shared memories with the trees and found Ramen disguised as one of Kanak's guards. The dwarf went off to get the seeds, and the mage was about to end him, but Yusibia used her magic and saved him in time. Ramen was held by the vines, and the dwarf recognized him as the awful experiment that the Fernan Emperor carried out. The dwarf explained that years ago the Fernan Emperor requested a book on necromancy so that he could implant his child into a dead body. This guy definitely tops the chart of insane rulers. Ramen said the dwarf was lying but was asked who his mother was. Then he remembered when he was created by the Fernan Emperor and experimented on like a rat. When the revolution happened, his father was killed, and he was asked to kill himself to hide the shame of the imperial family. That was when his brain snapped and he went haywire. One day, he then came across one of his father's failed experiments, Jasker, who had joined Kanak's ranks. Kanak arrived at the scene, and when Ramen saw Jasker, his magic began to waver. It was then revealed that Jasker wore an eye patch to hide his identity because he was the true heir to the Fernan bloodline. Suddenly, Jasker took up his blade to strike down Kanak. Yusibia was distracted as they fought, and Ramen used the chance to free himself. He unleashed his magic and burned the forest. When Yusibia woke up, she was helpless because there were no trees for her to manipulate. So much for unlocking her hidden powers. Luckily, she was still able to use her powers to thwart Ramen's attack. Meanwhile, Kanak sliced up Jasker like a shish kebab and acknowledged that things could never go back to normal between them. The dwarf was able to restrain Ramen with a magical suppressor, and Jasker was bound as well. With his eye patch gone, Jasker's true nature was revealed. On their way back to the palace, Kanak thought about how to interrogate Kanak and find out when his close friend began to harbor thoughts of betrayal. Yusibia showed Kanak that her injuries had healed, and she thought of the dwarf's words to her. After introducing himself as Ruff, he told her that they would meet later when things had settled down. The rest of the ride was quite an enjoyable one for the lovebirds, if you know what I mean. Unknown to them, there was still an enemy among the nobles that they had not discovered. In the streets of Riadon, the people cheered Kanak and Yusibia, wishing them a long life in their endeavors. Yusibia knew that her repulsive brother, Dietrich, was still a threat that needed to be dealt with. In Kanak's office, he offered to question Jasker since most interrogation methods didn't work on the Fernan dog. Oslin then said that he was glad that Kanak had finally found someone he loved dearly. Kanak had been overworked, so Yusibia kidnapped him to their bedroom, where they relieved each other of their stress. As if they hadn't oppressed all the single people enough, they went to bathe together and continued with their lewd ways. After spending a lifetime there, they finally stepped out. Back in their room, she said she would ask Ruff about Genessa Catterall because she wanted to have Kanak's child and live with him forever. Meanwhile, in Archaea, Dietrich took out his frustration on a lowly servant whose only crime was being an NPC in their world. He decided there was no other choice than to take out his dear little sister. Poor guy. Later on, Yusibia and Kanak went to interrogate Jaxer. Kanak didn't hesitate to impale Jaxer with a sword while questioning him, but Yusibia calmed him down and took over. From her questions, she realized that Jaxer was quite the oblivious fool, and all he wanted was to protect Ramen since they were brothers. After hearing her words, Jaxer told them to investigate the woods that belonged to the Gillier Trading Guild. When they got to the woods, Yusibia used the trees to guide their exploration. They eventually arrived at a strange building that had a foul stench. There, they found corpses of black elves with their hearts removed. Yusibia found Ramen's notes, which spoke about how he met Jaxer, who was nothing but a disposable pawn in his plans. She was convinced that she had to stop things from getting worse, even if it meant killing her own brother. When they got back, she gave Ramen's notes to Ruff. The notes revealed how Ramen continued his experiments and connived with Dietrich to put the whole continent in disarray. Ruff regretted not doing something sooner and decided to help Yusibia's research to look for a cure for the rigor. With the evidence in Jaxer's face, he revealed that Duke Hale was leading the rebellion against Kanak. Yusibia felt bad for Jaxer, but she and Kanak were glad that they had each other by their sides. Concurrently, Dietrich held a meeting with the other rulers of the North and told them that Kanak had declared war on the North. The rulers wanted proof of the rumors he had told them, but the spineless coward went ahead to tell them that Eusebia learned black magic and caused the rigor disease. He told them there was an attempt on her life, and Riadon had not been able to capture the culprit. As you would expect, the idiots believed him. All this was so that Dietrich could find the new race of humans that Raman had created. At Dietrich's request, Edwin spread flyers and rumors of the Empress around the empire. When word got to Eusebia about this, she told Kanek to calm down and not lash out because she had a plan. To quell the anger of the citizens, she addressed them publicly and demonstrated the effects of the antidote that they had been able to create. After that, Oslin informed Eusebia about the small forces that had begun making movements in the north. Unknown to Dietrich, Eusebia was also good with the spy game, thanks to her powers. She decided to go to the northern lands, and Kanak accompanied her. At the Riadon Manor in the north, rather than doing their jobs, the two of them were doing all manner of things in bed again. Later on, Oslin informed them that some troops were on their way to the manor. While Eusebia was trying to find out what gave Dietrich so much confidence, Duke Hale approached Raman. There, Raman revealed that his enhanced army was in Hal's mine and showed him where to find the key to awaken them. Dietrich approached the manor with his forces and tried to use Xander as leverage to get Eusebia to open the gates for him. On the other hand, Duke Hale got the mine and awakened the monsters. He was hoping to turn them into his minions, but the sounds of his bones being crushed in their mouths begged to differ. Back at the manor, Xander tried to sway his sister, but Kanak told Eusebia not to let her resolve waver. It was obvious that Xander was oblivious and just a disposable pawn in Dietrich's schemes. Hence, she felt bad for the poor lad. She eventually came down to see her brothers, and Dietrich seized the opportunity to take Xander as a hostage. After that, he unleashed the foul army of the new race of humans he had acquired from Raman. Soon after, a battle broke out between the vile ghouls and Kanak's forces. Dietrich was willing to let Xander go free in exchange for Eusebia, and she agreed. Kanak was against it, but he had never really been able to refuse her requests. As Xander got free, Dietrich slapped Eusebia and made her feel like an undeserving peasant. She mustered up the courage she needed and told Dietrich that he was nothing but a weak and vulnerable man. Feeling enraged, he tried to stab her but walked right into her trap. She held him by the collar and activated her magic. With Dietrich tied up, she destroyed the necklace that he used to control the ghouls. The ghouls began disappearing, and then Kanak and his troops saved Eusebia and stalled the monsters. With her last strength, Eusebia split the ground open and drove the monsters into the abyss. Xander felt bad for foolishly believing Dietrich's lies, but Eusebia told him not to let it affect the way he put his trust in others. After the battle, she approached Dietrich in the room where he was chained up. She told him that he had been stripped of his title as regent and branded a war criminal. This deranged fool assumed that his sister conspired with Xander against him and refused to admit he was just hungry for power. He tried to attack her, but she told him to be careful because the ghouls had feasted on his lower body and made him a cripple. She left the room and was finally able to confront her past self, who had been haunting her. While being transported back, Dietrich tried to off himself, but he was too much of a weakling to make it fatal. After Kanak and Eusebia were warmly welcomed back to Riadon, Oslin wasted no time to tell them that there was still a lot to do. For that day, they rested and went to the shower together. I don't need to tell you what happened in the bath. You already know how these two can be. While Eusebia slept, Kanak went to see Jaxer and told him that his involvement in the rebellion would be covered up. It was a decision he and Oslin agreed to since branding Jaxer as a traitor wouldn't do them any good in the future. Jasker was given a chance at a new life, and Kanak acknowledged him as his brother, but he asked the Emperor to kill him. Kanak thrust his blade through Jasker's chest and ended his miserable life. Later on, Raman met his end with a public execution. The rest of the rebel nobles were arrested, and all that was left was to cure the great river. Just then, Eusebia received a letter about Dietrich's death. She was neither happy nor sad and felt that there was a screw loose in her head. The next day, Kanak said the officials of the Ministry of Disaster Relief wanted Eusebia to oversee their operations. While they were discussing, Oslin called him out to talk about an important matter. After Eusebia met with the ministry, the Mage's Tower and the temple requested an audience with her. A year later, the Fihar River was fully purified. Later on, Eusebia met with Ruff, and he introduced her to an elf known as Charis. Charis was friends with Genessa Catarol and was the one who bestowed the blessing of the elves on Genessa's child. To help with Eusebia's barrenness, Charis showed her the moment Genessa was granted the blessing of conception. After seeing that it was the Arjunwood who granted Genessa's wish, Eusebia was confident that she'd be able to bear a child. Days later, Eusebia and Kanak went to Archaea to see her father and Xander. The two of them went to see the Arjunwood, who spoke about her encounter with Kanak in his past life. She granted Eusebia the blessing of conception and revealed the past memories of the couple to each other. They ended up living happily ever after and had 2 beautiful children.